Welcome to this, the latest episode in the IEA's Zeroing In series, with me, Syed Kamall. I'm the Academic and Research Director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I'm also a Professor of Politics and International Relations at St Mary's University in Twickenham. Now, in this series, we're joined by academics, business people, entrepreneurs, economists and activists and others with a wide range of views to discuss the UK's legal commitment to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. We discuss specific issues such as fiscal policy, taxation, renewable energy, transport, heating, but we also ask the fundamental question of whether targets are necessary or achievable. Is net zero carbon achievable by 2050? And is it really the best way to clean up our planet? What are the free market or least interventionist solutions? What policy levers should be pulled? Well, today I'm delighted to be joined by Zion Knights, UK Director of Environmental Progress and a former Extinction Rebellion spokesperson. She's been called Britain's greenest mother by the Daily Telegraph, is the author of a book, The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting. And The Guardian referred to Zion as an eco-pragmatist, happily heavy on science. Zion, thank you very much for joining us. Can I start with a question on targets? Now, the UK government and the EU have both set these targets of net zero by 2050. What are your thoughts on the targets themselves? Are they realistic? Are they achievable? And what's the best way you think of achieving them?
I think that the question kind of comes down to whether or not you have faith in humanity, because technically they absolutely are achievable. The IPCC, the International Government, sorry, I fluffed that up for some reason. Okay. I think that the question as to whether or not they're achievable comes down to your faith in humanity and our ability to fix the mistakes we've made, because technically we absolutely are capable of doing so. And there have been a lot of numbers crunched to show this, for example, by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The IPCC report, clearly outlines things that we can do, climate policies that we can make to achieve that net zero by 2050 target. So, it doesn't seem to me like it is, completely out of our reach. I'm not feeling hopeless about it. The problem is that we aren't really achieving any of those policies at the moment. I think it's good that we're finally having this discussion after decades of inaction on, dealing with global warming. So I'm actually an optimist, and I look at things that we have achieved as humanity, putting people on the moon, creating the International Space Station. I think we're absolutely capable of it. It's just the will, it's just the political will and leadership that's missing. But as I say, I think even just in recent weeks, there have been some phenomenal changes, like what's just happened in China with their 2060 target. And I think, we're finally getting the ball rolling. So I'm optimistic.
Now, you spoke about political will there. Do you agree that there is now more political will across the political spectrum and not just from one part of the spectrum? Or do you still very much feel most of that will is on, say, the left of the spectrum compared to the right?
I think part of the problems is, and this makes me a little bit unpopular in some circles, but I think one of the problems is that green issues have often been in the realm of the left, and I don't really understand why that is. And traditionally, a lot of conservatives like Margaret Thatcher, you could go back and look at her speech in the 80s about global warming. She was a scientist. She was warning about it then. She gave a phenomenal speech with all sorts of solutions suggested in there. I don't know where that went. I don't know why it disappeared and why it just became a left green issue. This is an issue that's, involves all of us. So I think it's really good that it's finally becoming more of a wider debate that isn't just about some fringe movement, that people don't identify with, because it affects all of us. And it's not about where you politically stand. It's about whether or not we want a healthy, habitable planet for our children and grandchildren.
Well, I'm obviously very pleased to hear you say that, because I'm obviously a classical liberal. I'd be considered of the right, but I'm also very conscious about wanting a cleaner environment, less pollution, less waste. And I've always wondered why it's been seen as sort of part of the left, and why it's almost become tribal in many ways. Can I ask you to sort of test this a bit more? Because clearly people have seen more about Extinction Rebellion. I will ask you about your own journey. You left Extinction Rebellion in June to become an advocate for nuclear power. I think you wrote something that the facts didn't change, but once you understood them, you did change your mind, and you felt duped about after being surrounded by anti-nuclear campaigners. And of course, people remember your challenging interview with Andrew Neil. We've all had those. Can you tell us a bit about your intellectual journey, given that you were with Extinction Rebellion?
I think the problem is when you care about these issues, as we just, discussed, you end up in a certain group, you do end up in a certain tribe. So I was really young and I was worried about all of these issues, and I was trying to get my parents to recycle. There was no curbside recycling back then in the early 90s. It was a really odd thing for me to do, trying to get them to save up their bottles and take it to the bottle bank when we went shopping. They just were like, "Dion, what are you doing? What? Nobody cares about this." But now they recycle everything, right? We made it easy for them. They totally understand it. But it's taken years for us to get to that point. And so naturally, I went into some of these groups, some of these green groups are always on the left. Now there are more that aren't, and there's a wider spectrum definitely now available. But at the time, that was it. I went into those groups. I was in my local Greenpeace group. I was in Camp for Climate Action. I was really involved for quite a long time. This was about 15 years ago, In university, I helped form the first environmental group there. With hindsight, yes, it was again, that echo chamber of just the left. And what I realized over many years is that it's just not appealing to most people, and that it's okay if people want to stay in that tribe and they want to be in the echo chamber. I think tribalism is really natural to humans, in an evolutionary way. If you didn't have your tribe, they kick you out, you're less likely to survive. So I completely understand people are naturally tribal. They want to fit in with the people around them. And I kind of didn't fit in, to be honest. Like right from the start, I didn't fit in. So I cared about the same issue. My values are the same. But I also care about evidence. I care very strongly about data. And if I see a huge body of data that contradicts me, I will change my mind. And that's what happened. So to me, I don't think it was that kind of really odd thing for me to do that I became a different person or anything like that. I'm exactly the same person. And I can bring into this my book that I wrote back in, I think, 2015. It was published, Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting. That was very much for this green parenting community that I was a part of, and it had a chapter on vaccines, which upset a lot of people. I mean, I got a lot of hate mail, and to be honest, I was a lot younger. I wasn't expecting it. And I didn't really know how to deal with it. So I went back to university and studied science communication, did a master's in science communication, because I wanted to learn how we overcome this polarization. We talk to people from...
Oh dear, I think I've lost you there. Let's see if I can get you back. I'm going to pause. Starting again. 1, 2, 3.
I've been involved in the environmental movement for about 15 years. So I was always in these kind of, left-wing, sometimes quite radical green groups. And it was because I cared about those issues. So I was a young child trying to get my parents to recycle. I was learning about global warming at school and coming home and trying to get them to collect bottles and take them to the bottle bank. And they thought I was weird. Why is she doing that? Although now they recycle everything. So, but now it's easy. They can just put it out on the curb. So I understand that it's easier for them. But I was really concerned, and naturally I looked around at the community around me, and I joined groups like Greenpeace, Camp for Climate Action, and at my university I founded our first kind of green group at Reading University at the time. And we campaigned for things on campus. We campaigned for things like renewable energy. Back then that was what I believed was a solution. And I think one of the problems is when you're in those communities is you are surrounded by the same kind of beliefs. And so there is this anti-nuclear sentiment, and it's not, nobody's deliberately doing it. Nobody's sitting you down and saying, hey, this is really bad. Don't believe in it. You just kind of absorb all the people that you're around, that you trust and that you care about. Occasionally will make a joke about nuclear, or occasionally will come out with some fact about nuclear, and you just believe it and you don't even question it. So for a long time that was me, and I was involved in these movements. And then I had a book published, The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting, and that was very much for this community I was part of, which was this green parenting community. And they were really upset with me because it had a chapter on vaccines, and to me, there was a chapter on sleeping, there was a chapter on transport, there was a chapter on diet, there was a chapter on vaccines. I just looked at all the research, read loads of studies while I was up at night, looking after my little newborn daughter who was always awake in the night. And I was just researching, and I was writing stuff out. I thought this could be a really useful guide for people. It's useful for me. And then I had so much hate mail about that vaccines chapter, and it confused me because people would say, what's happened to you, Zion? Are you being paid by Big Pharma? Why are you advocating for vaccines? And I would say the scientific method that underpins that chapter, that's exactly the same for all of the chapters. So you're agreeing with the other chapters, but you're kind of cherry picking. And I did have some hate mail and people just saying, I'm just going to give you 1 star on Amazon because I don't like that chapter and etc. But I also had a lot of interesting conversations. And that was really important to me even back then. I think things now have become even more polarized. But back then, I sort of thought, right, this is really important. I want to learn how to communicate about data, what's happening. How do we solve the issues? Because we're not doing it. I could see that, we weren't making any changes really in tackling climate change. So I went back to university and I got a master's in science communication, which was invaluable in learning some of these things. And to me, now I'm involved in the nuclear fight. It's not that different than the vaccine. It's actually very similar, the way that I talk to people and the kind of arguments that I've come up against and so on. So when I saw the Extinction Rebellion was formed, I actually stepped out of activism for years. I'd kind of gone solo, done my book, was doing lots of interviews. And then I saw that they were advocating for the science and they were talking about the IPCC report. And I got really excited and thought, wow, is this going to be my tribe? Finally, somewhere I fit in. I left all of these groups. I left the Green Party over nuclear years before. I used to be a member there. And so I thought, great, these people are actually on board. And, when I got involved, I would say there are a lot of people and there are scientists in Extinction Rebellion who do care, who are in there because they want to represent the facts correctly. And so in a way I had found a group that I completely vibed with, but obviously, as everybody knows, I then came up against this issue with the 6 billion figure, which one of the more visible members and founding members had come up with. And what you didn't know on that Andrew Neil show was that I had spent weeks and weeks in discussion, something like 6 weeks of discussions and meetings about that figure, where I was saying we should retract it because there isn't good evidence. And then there were a whole lot of other people who said, well, we found scientists to support it, we should stick with it. And I was saying, that's not how science works. And you don't need to use it because there's loads of really good information about things that are going to happen if we don't keep below 1.5 warming. That discussion went on, honestly, for weeks. We didn't really come up with a solution. Me and a lot of the other scientists were kind of exhausted by it. So when I sat down in that chair, and it was the first thing that came up, and I knew that I just couldn't defend it. But I also knew I was there as a spokesperson, and that officially they wanted me to support it, and recently they've written that they still support it. And that's up to them, but I just couldn't do it and completely floundered. So I had to not only leave, but really come out publicly and say that was what happened, so that people understood that I wasn't floundering because I don't know anything. I was floundering because it's in a really difficult position. And actually, I stand by everything I've said since then, that we need to stick to the facts. We need to be really careful about how we communicate about these issues, because the second you deviate, you lose all credibility. And it's really important to me that we don't do that, because we need to get it right. We spent decades not acting, not creating good policies for dealing with climate change, and I feel like it's just getting to the last hurdle now. We need to do it sooner rather than later.
Do you think in some way that sort of demonstrates something that we've lost in the history of science? Because science originally was part of, in fact, philosophy in the early days, and it grew out of philosophy. And one of the things that I find quite disturbing about the debate around science is the sort of lack of contestability. If you look at the history of science, there have been people have established what they would have said were the scientific facts. The world is flat, or the universe spins around or revolves around the Earth, for example. Those were then challenged and contested. And why do people find it so hard, the sort of contestability of science? They're so keen to say this is the science, and and this will be it forevermore. And do you think that's part of the problem, that people don't accept that science is also equally, and not necessarily subjective, but contestable?
Absolutely. And I just called out a paper that was released this week that was reported everywhere. And I'm actually surprised that this paper was printed in a journal, because anybody who reads it can see it's really shoddy. It's just shoddy. And the same author wrote a similar paper 4 years ago and had to retract it. I don't know what's happening, but there is an issue there with the peer review process. And I'm actually writing to the journal asking them, what on earth's going on? We need to hold science accountable. It's the best measure we have for anything. We've got to protect that. So, I'm completely agree with you on that. Whether or not things have gotten worse, I think that the internet has a lot to do with this. Social media has a lot to do with this. Just saw a documentary on this, actually, The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's got a lot of anti-capitalist stuff in there, so you might not like it, but it basically just makes this point that, look, here's some of the tech bosses, here's how they set up social media, and here's some of the regrets, and them saying actually it's got a bit out of hand and it's creating this polarization, and now we don't know how to deal with it. And I thought that was really brave of them to come forward and say that, and also that it's really important because children and people who are not used to going the way and looking up data and finding out facts for themselves, which actually, let's face it, that's most people. They're just being fed fake news, as they say, or just being deliberately even misfed information, not deliberately with any kind of sinister motive that people want them to believe XYZ thing. It's just that's how the algorithms work, because it makes them read more articles. That's what the documentary showed anyway. I think, you know, it's recognized that this is a huge and growing problem. And I think we just need to be hypercritical of everything. And that actually, in a way, we're not really taught to do that. We're not really taught to have these kind of critical thinking skills. And as you say, that is what science was. That's why it was philosophy, right? Is you question everything. You start from the point where you question everything. And that was what brought me to nuclear, is that I started to question things that I'd been told, like thousands of people died in Fukushima. And it was just one paper, one scientific paper, you know, just showed me that was a lie. No one died from radiation. I couldn't believe it, you know, completely I just went, wow, I need to read everything on this, not opinions. I need to read the facts, look at the numbers and work out what's going on, and read a huge body of data and completely changed my mind on it, and actually wanted to undo some of the damage from before as well. I wasn't a massive anti-nuclear advocate, but I believed it, you know, and I did write articles on it. And so, you know, I now think actually that kind of attitude has slowed action on climate, dealing with climate change. So that's why I've you know, I've done what to other people look like a U-turn, but to me is that actual kind of natural progression.
Let me ask you about, because clearly even people who are, you know, on the right have concerns about nuclear as well. This is not necessarily a left-right thing. I remember there were many trade unionists on the left who were in favour of nuclear power, and people on the right who were conservationists who said it's dangerous. How do you react to people who say, well, look at Chernobyl, look at Fukushima, look at Mayan Island years ago, you know, it hasn't been proven, and fission is too early, and there's supposed to be no radiation there. But, you know, we haven't proved it all. Some people say SMRs, they worry about long-term storage. How do you address a lot of those criticisms?
I mean, we could be here all day by trying to address them all, but, you know, something like Fukushima, I just urge them to go and look up the facts, and I'll just show them, you know, something like Our World in Data. It's got good numbers on it. You can go and have a look. 12 people did die in the blast at Chernobyl. You know, Fukushima, no one died from radiation. They were disasters. They were meltdowns. But the numbers, if you just look at the numbers, let's put all our ideology and our politics aside. If you just look at the numbers, nuclear is safer than fossil fuels. And what do we use mostly now? So we're looking at deaths from the extraction process, just from being part of the industry. You know, we're looking at air pollution, 7 million deaths from air pollution a year, and that's before we're even talking about climate change. Before we even get to talking about climate change, you know, that's just data. And that's the kind of thing that I saw, that I just kind of went, oh my goodness, why didn't I know this? And why doesn't everyone know this? And actually, I would say there's a kind of anti-nuclear bias going on in all of the papers, in all, just everywhere. Just, you know, I just watched David Attenborough's documentary, thought it was great. Starts with Chernobyl. Yeah. Giving Chernobyl as the worst example of what humans have, you know, why start with that? What about the Challenger? What about Challenger? Do you remember when Challenger blew up?
Yes.
Astronauts died, like 7 people died. How come people aren't anti-space exploration? Then it happened again with Columbia. Come on, you know, this is, yes, 12 people died in a blast, and we need to minimize that. And we have, right now, nuclear plants, they take almost twice as long to build, because they've added so many safety measures so that things like that can't happen again. You've got to look at things like Fessenheim, which they just closed in France. 50 years of clean energy without an incident. You know, there's nothing to rival it. So all of these things, waste, you know, people have this idea, this popular, I think it comes from popular culture, where it's this kind of goopy, corrosive, acidic liquid, and it, you know, it's mismatched. It comes from The Simpsons, let's be honest. It comes from The Simpsons, and it's in a lot of other, and you know what, it's the image I had. It's what I thought when I read that nuclear waste was solid, and it was these little cylinders that they bury in loads of concrete, and then you can take a Geiger counter, you can measure the radiation, and it's less than you get in Cornwall, right? I live in Devon near Cornwall. Quite basically, areas higher up, they have more radiation. That's just, you know, radiation. So radiation's an interesting discussion, because you just start with the fact that it comes from space, it's in all of us, it's in food. You know, so I started this little group called Nuclear for Net Zero, and we've been doing some little pro-nuclear protests, just trying to shift the dialogue, you know, have a bit of fun with it. We give out bananas, that's kind of our symbol. People say, why are you giving me a banana? It's radioactive, and it's true, they're above average radioactive. You know, you eat one of them, you've already got more radiation in you than if you go and visit Fukushima. So, you know, it's really important to have those conversations. And we went down and had a swim at Sizewell Beach, where the Sizewell B is and where sea would be built, and people said, I can't believe you're swimming in the water. They actually have this belief that the water is radioactive. Where does that come from? It's ridiculous. I mean, you must know that. You know, most people you think would know it, but you'd be surprised at what's really deep down in their kind of fear. And it's very similar to vaccines. I have a fear that something's going to happen to my child, and actually your child's more at risk if you don't get it, right? If you don't get the vaccine, your child's more at risk. Go and ask them in developed countries where they're crying out for these vaccines. But in highly preventable diseases, it's a similar thing. Our planet is crying out for solutions that bring down emissions, bring down air pollution as well. Over here, sure, we have wind. What happens when it's not windy? This is really easy to check. Again, I always urge people, don't just listen to me, go and look at the facts yourself. So you can go to electricitymap.org any day, and every day it will show you what our energy mix was. So a few days ago, we were using wind, and the wind dropped. You see the numbers. So nuclear chugs along at about 20%. Wind can be about 30%. When it drops, the coal number goes up. It's as simple as that. When it drops, we import coal. I've even had environmentalists who can get really bogged down in this ideology, just defend the ideology, this thing. And they say we're phasing out coal, Zion. A bit of coal is not a problem. And I say, have you thought about going to the communities, the places where the coal plant? You want to talk about nuclear being polluting? You must know, right, what these areas look around these coal plants, and that the people that live there suffer severe issues. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Just Google it. Just look it up. No, don't just Google it. Look at some scientific data. But it's really there's a huge body of research. No one is saying that coal is safe, right? No one is saying that. Before we even talk about emissions, it's bad for your health. It's bad for air pollution. People living in those areas have severe respiratory issues. Their kids have high levels of asthma. Some of them can't go outside. I spoke to a community in Poland where people actually couldn't go outside. They have soot on their windows, and they live there because they're poor. They cannot afford to live somewhere else. That's just the reality of it. I remember in the Punjab reading about the Guru Dev coal plants closed now. Similar thing, and they have no access to healthcare there, right? So they got really bad health issues, and they don't even have electricity. So I'm just saying to the environmentalist movement over here, you cannot say that that's okay because you want wind most of the time, but you're happy to with a bit of coal. You cannot say that outsourcing that cost because the environment and the people are elsewhere is okay. It's not okay. I think we have a moral obligation at this point, and because we're perfectly capable of doing it, bringing our emissions down to net zero to allow those other countries to have some of the development that they need so that they can have a better quality of life.
I think some of the debate, though, it also goes back to the history in the UK of Windscale and Sellafield, and people were, I think, reporting higher incidence of being exposed to radiation there. I suppose that's one of the issues that the pro-nuclear debate will have to take on as well. But can I go back to the, if you like, for want of a better phrase, your former tribe, and am I being overly optimistic that, and am I just being too nice in hoping that there can be a dialogue? Or are people in, for example, groups like Extinction Rebellion just going to say, if you're a capitalist or you're a classical liberal, sorry, you're a bad guy, and actually you're doing more damage to the planet, end of story? Or is there a way to achieve a dialogue around a cleaner environment?
Well, actually, Extinction Rebellion isn't anti-capitalism. We had a discussion when I was in Extinction Rebellion, and they would not, some people, really strongly wanted it to be, and the decision was taken that we wouldn't be, because that wasn't one of their, so their core demands is basically what they're fighting for. Their 3 demands, that's it, and they're not pro anti-nuclear officially. Obviously there are a lot of anti-people nuclear involved in Extinction Rebellion, but I'd say again, quite a few of the scientists aren't. So in that way, they are a little bit different, and that is why I was involved, because I feel like that's really progressive for the green movement. But obviously, they're fighting 2 things. This is the biggest issue for me. What I came to realize is they're not just fighting against climate change; they're fighting for system change. That's what that 3rd demand is. They want citizen assemblies. They will make decisions about climate. That's it. We fixed 2 things, and I've kind of just gone, well, even if you got the change that you wanted, is that going to be in time to bring down emissions? Probably not. I think we've got to work with what we have. Whole system thing is another debate, and I think there's a danger of mixing those 2 things up, because climate change is really just about bringing down emissions. If we bring down emissions, and we've solved the problem. If we'd done it 30 years ago, if we built a load of nuclear plants 30 years ago, then we wouldn't be in this position. We've got to look at the scale of risk here. Yes, things have gone wrong. As I say, if you look at the the fossil fuel industry, it's been so much worse. The problem is they're very clever. They've branded themselves very well. Natural gas, people have a really good image of them, and I'm like, well, hang on a minute, they're actually the problem. I'm not attacking anyone there specifically, but it is a problem. And nuclear's got this huge burden from just a few events, and the numbers are not as bad, even with Sellafield, even with everything you've described.
Yeah.
They're just not as bad. And they offer us, a single plant can offer us 80 years of clean energy. I think we're lucky that we have that. I don't even think we need to say we need fission or we need SMRs. We have something now that we can build, but we're not even being friendly towards investors who could build it, which is what just happened at Wilfer, where Hitachi pulled out after putting in billions. The government did not make a commitment on Wilfer, and they pulled out. It's a really unfriendly environment for the nuclear industry. That's got to change if we're going to build more nuclear. I don't see how else we're going to bring down emissions.
Can I just ask you before I want to go on to the sort of free market solutions? Clearly, I'm speaking from a classical liberal free market think tank, and I know time is run out. But one of the questions I really want to ask you. Some of the other interviewees in this series have looked at the Extinction Rebellion and looked at some of their protests, looked at the fact that they tried to, one protest, they tried to stop people getting on public transport. They blocked recycling trucks. I remember I was cycling and they blocked my cycle lane. I said, can you get out of the way, please? I'm cycling because I do this because I think it's good for the environment. And the guy had a go at me. Do you think, and so some of our previous interviews said that they think that they actually do more damage to the environmental movement than good. Do you think that's a bit harsh? What's your view of that? Do you think there's a danger that they could put people off the environmental movement?
Well, I think the thing is that their strategy isn't to get people on board with the movement. Their strategy is to agitate the state. That is their basic strategy that a lot of people don't understand. Yeah. They agitate the state, they provoke a reaction, they force change. That's what they're trying to do. So they will disrupt ordinary people, and they're not worried, or they shouldn't. I think actually they do get worried, but it's kind of doesn't fit with their own strategy of they're not supposed to be popular. They can compare themselves to suffragettes, for example. So but what I would say, that public transport thing where Canning Town, that was right. We had a lot of talks about that, and was agreed that it was just wrong and that they just shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And that even though it was designed because they wanted to agitate and they wanted to provoke discussion, and they did provoke discussion. You saw they then were on television everywhere discussing what they'd done, and that's their aim. They realized that had kind of gone a step too far, and I think they've been a lot more careful since then. And that's actually, I know a lot of people didn't agree with their media protests, but that was them responding in a different way, saying, well, what if we just attack this group instead of going for public transport? But yes, I think it does have a danger. I think the danger is that it becomes more polarized, and so if you care about those issues, you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to be seen as being part of this kind of fringe group. And that's dangerous, and I've seen that's just happened for so long. So, but I feel optimistic that there are a lot more people talking about these issues who aren't on that side or in that group, and that I don't really see that that's happened before. So maybe that will change, and they will always occupy that little space, I think. And before them it was Greenpeace, and before them it was something else. I think they'll always occupy that space, but the important thing is that the discussion becomes much more wider than that, and also that politicians, get involved, because they're, it's not just about politics. Like this impacts them and their children too, and that really needs to be understood, so that we can just move forward with creating policies that frankly we'll all be happy with. We're all on the same side. We all want a habitable planet. There's no other one in the known universe, right? We just got this one, so we need to sort it out.
So I'm going to end on this question. The Institute of Economic Affairs, we're a classical liberal free market think tank, but we're a forum for discussion. So I say to people who come on this on the show and other events that we do, I don't care what your personal views are. I don't care whether you believe in climate change, it's not happening, whether you believe it's man-made or not, whether we can do anything about it, whether we can mitigate, adapt, whatever. But the fact is, the governments have set these targets of net zero by 2050, whatever you think of them. And I'm looking at what's the most free market, least interventionist way to achieve that. What would you say to people like me and others in the free market movement about getting involved in this debate and making sure that our voices are heard?
I'm going to say we need to build more nuclear, and it's a very unfriendly climate for nuclear. And you've got the government saying we're going to invest in wind farms, great. But what happens with the intermittency when the power drops? We just end up using more fossil fuels. They come from, there's gas from Russia, it's gas from Norway, it's coal from Poland. We need energy independence. We're a little island. Post-COVID, post-Brexit, we need jobs. We need industry. We want to keep our good, clever engineers and physicists here. This is a perfect opportunity. Sizewell alone will create 10,000 jobs. These are highly skilled jobs in Wilfer. Is that area that lost Wilfer. People in the community and unions, as you say, unions are very supportive because they lost highly skilled jobs. What do we want for this country? We've got to look further ahead. So that meets the target and it boosts our economy. If you want to talk about economy, this is highly skilled jobs. This is not breaking legally bound terms for bringing our emissions down, which we are set to do with the 2030 target as well, the government's own target, and probably 2050, because we're not really putting those policies in place. And it's a very unfriendly place for investors in nuclear to come. And now we're saying, government saying, oh, well, we're going to have this advanced tech in 10, 20 years time. We don't have that much time. And actually, if people fear nuclear now, how are they going to feel about new technology that hasn't been tested? I'm not against it. I think we should fund everything. We put people in space. Let's fund everything. Let's get on with this. Let's be world leaders on this. Why not? Where's that vision gone? Nobody seems to have that leadership anymore, honestly. But yeah, if we build more nuclear, we bring our emissions down. We get better air quality. We bring jobs to the UK. That's what I would say, that we need more vocal advocates. And at the moment, there aren't very many because there's a lot of nuclear denial about it. It's just too easy to talk about Fukushima or Chernobyl. I urge people to go and look at the facts and address their own fears. And it's okay to have those fears. But, if you're going to fear something, fear the quality of life that people will have because of climate change, not even just here, but, in other places in the world where they're already suffering. India's a good example of where they're already, by 2030, they're going to have 40% of India won't have access to water. That's just even if you take climate change out of the equation, look, what do they need to deal with that? They need infrastructure, they need development, they need what we had, but then we're saying, well, you can't use fossil fuels. We can't pretend that renewables are going to cut it. Yes, renewables might warm their homes, but renewables are not going to give them what we had. They're just not, and they're not going to keep their hospitals running. Intermittent power won't do it. That's why gas is good, right? That's why we use gas and coal for a long time. So we need to support the best solution we have, which is nuclear. And that is why I've ended up for a long journey as an environmentalist, and I still see myself as an environmentalist. So that's why I've ended up in this space, because 73% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from energy. Energy is the biggest issue. You can do what you like with land reform, you can change the way you eat, you can do all the stuff that I spent years advocating for, but it doesn't change anything if we're still dependent on polluting fossil fuels. We've got to change that, and we've got to change it as well so that other countries that do need to use fossil fuels to develop have a chance to do it. Instead of telling them they can't do it because we made a mistake and we pumped lots into the atmosphere, we need to bring our emissions down to allow them to do it. So we need to get to net zero, and I really think we're completely capable of it. I don't have to sit here and make a case for that. The numbers have been crunched. It's basic arithmetic shows that it's possible. It's just the will that's missing.
One of the things you seem to be suggesting is that the need for a lot of government intervention for the nuclear solution, if you like. Now, one of the questions I asked is, why are you not leaving it to the market to pick the technology solution? Why do you think there has to be this government intervention to such an extent? Is nuclear really the only option for zero carbon?
Nuclear is the most realistic option if we want something reliable and efficient to replace fossil fuels. We can still have renewables. The IPCC says we need a combination of renewables, nuclear, and carbon capture storage. At the moment, we're just not getting anywhere on nuclear. So we have 50 operational reactors and 14 are due to be shut down by 2030. They're old tech. If we build Sizewell and Hinkley, that will kind of keep us going at where we were. It's not more. It's not extra clean energy. It's just keeping us afloat. Really, we need to build more sites like Wilfer and Moorside. We need to build as much as possible. What happened with Wilfer shows that it's just not a friendly place for the nuclear industry. They ended up pulling out because the government wouldn't commit. So the government does need to, provide this assurance to other companies so that they can come in and build. We get lots of benefits out of it, as I said earlier. It's a complete win-win situation. And I think, once people start to see emissions coming down, they'll understand. If we don't do it, here's the reality. It's either two things will happen. Either we don't do it, and at some point, there are top-down decisions that tell us to reduce consumption by phenomenal amounts, in a kind of authoritarian way that's not off the table. Because at some point, we will have to do it. No one wants that scenario. Let's avoid that. The other thing is that we might just invest lots in renewables and just wean off of fossil fuels. This is what happened in Germany with its energy wind project. Again, I urge people to go and read what happened. They spent billions on renewables, billions, of euros, and they phased out their nuclear plants. And what happened? They ended up using more coal, and they actually have really expensive electricity as a result of that. It's 1.7 times more expensive than in France. France has 75% clean energy from nuclear. They have amazing energy policy, like energy security policy, that we just don't have. We're plugging along at 20%. We're going to lose that if we don't build Sizewell. We've just got to we need all hands on deck with this. And part of that for me is kind of trying to shift the public perception, because that is a barrier to policymakers who are not necessarily listening to experts because they're worried about public response, So it's all hands on deck. We just need more advocates. We need to follow the science. We need to follow the evidence. IPCC recommend nuclear. It just seems like a no-brainer to me, but here I am repeating the same thing again and again. So obviously, we're not quite there yet.
Zion, this has been a fascinating discussion today. And so what I want to end up, I always give the guests the chance of sort of the elevator pitch, as it were. Now, you go into a building and you walk into an elevator or a lift. You can tell I've been speaking to Americans. You get in there and Boris Johnson's in there, and you've got, until you get to whatever floor it is, the sort of elevator pitch about what you think should be done to achieve first of all, what you think of the targets, the 2050 targets, and what you think should be done to achieve those targets. What's your pitch?
2050 target is brilliant. Sooner the better. Let's be world leaders on this. Let's not just say that we're going to do it and then not commit. Let's get real policies and plans in place. Those aren't there yet. Let's get them in place to show that we can be world leaders. We can achieve this. We have incredible insights. We have incredible scientists and engineers. We've got the data. There's no reason that we can't build back better after COVID, create more jobs. Hit that elevator button. I'm going to reach for the sky and say, let's build Sizewell. Let's build Moorside. Let's build Wilfer. Let's build as much nuclear as possible. He can still have his SMRs. I know he loves SMRs. He can still pay for advanced tech, but you know what? That tech comes from investing in what we have now. We need to build what we have, what works right now. And there's no limits, really. There's no limits. Everybody wants clean, abundant, cheap energy. There's no loss in this situation. That's what I would say.
Well, Zion Lights, a UK Director of Environmental Progress, thank you very much for joining us today. Can I also thank our listeners and viewers for joining us? For more details of our online content, please visit our website, iea.org.uk, subscribe to our YouTube channel, IEA London, and listen to our podcast on Podbean. Thank you for watching or listening today. We hope that you'll join us again soon. Thank you.